Welcome to tonight's event, Enough is Enough, the Politics of Health in Cartoons. My name is Victoria Sweetmore. I'm a member of the History of Nursing Forum Steering Committee, so I'm chairing tonight. As a committee member of the History of Nursing Forum, I'm really pleased to be chairing this event. It's not a subject I know really anything about. So when they asked for volunteers, I was straight in there saying I'd love to come and do it and learn a little bit more about this quite niche area, really. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers tonight. The RCN History of Nursing Forum has existed since the 1980s with a mission to protect, preserve, share and cherish nursing history and to support RCN members' interest in nursing history. We have many ongoing projects, including collecting oral histories of notable nurses and working in partnership with the RCN Library and Museum to promote nursing history to as wide an audience as possible. And that's done through events such as this. Just a few general housekeeping bits for you. There are no planned fire alarm tests, so if the alarm does sound, please do exit the building through the nearest fire exit, which is either to your left or to the back of the room. You need to go down one flight of stairs, or the muster point is inside Cavendish Square. The toilets are through the door to the left. They're down one flight of stairs, or there are accessible toilets through the doors to the back of the room. The event's being recorded and will be made available afterwards. However, we'll not record the audience questions. Unfortunately, in a slight change to the advertised programme, Kath Jackson is unwell, so is unable to join us and speak tonight. But you'll have seen some of the cartoons playing as you entered, and there'll be some as well at the end when the event's finished and as you exit. We will have questions and answers, but if we could hold those to the end, please, for the panel session. Okay, I think I've covered those bits. So, our first speaker is historian Dr. Sue Hawkins. She's currently researching the development of children's hospital nursing in the late 19th century. She previously taught at Kingston University and has also published on nursing as an emancipating occupation for late Victorian women and the history of women's involvement in science. So, Sue, if you'd like to come up. Do you want to come up that way? Somewhat that way? Yeah.
Right, thank you very much for coming. It's really lovely to see so many people here. And I apologise for my voice if it gets a bit croaky. I've had a cold for the past week, but anyway, we'll try and get through. So what I'm going to do today is, first slide. Oh, I can do that with that. Yeah, good. So what I want to do today is introduce you to the cartoons of Ada Bois, B-O-I-S. Now, I just had a conversation with one person in the audience, is how do you pronounce her surname? I have no idea. I'm affecting a French interpretation, but there's no basis for that whatsoever other than it's the way I would pronounce that word. Anyway, so we're going to look at the cartoons of Ada Bois, who was a probationary nurse at Great Ormond Street Hospital, or as it was known then, the Hospital for Sick Children. And she was there right at the very turn of the 20th century, from the end of the 19th into the 20th century. I should be honest here, a little like, I've forgotten your name, I'm sorry. Yes, Victoria. I also know very little, if anything, about the use of cartoons in history, the development of cartoons, or anything about cartoonist skills. I am a history of nursing. And I'm talking using about these cartoons because We came across them many years ago at the archive in Great Ormond Street. They're contained in two rather small and uninspiring notebooks, and they record the life at the hospital for a trainee nurse. But unlike similar accounts of trainee nurses' experiences, instead of being in the form of memoir or diary, Ada's memories are captured in what can only be described as doggerel verse, accompanied by cartoons illustrating her experiences. There are over 100 pages of illustrations and text across the two notebooks, which provide a unique insight into the challenges faced by all young nurses in the late 19th century, fresh out of their protective home environments. In Ada's world, the constant danger of infection features large, as do the sometimes strained relationships, strained, not strange, relationships between nurses themselves, nurses and doctors, and other senior officials. Her cartoons and verse reflect these pressures and tensions, and in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to give you a flavour of her work. We do not have time to see everything. So just before we do that, a quick introduction to Ada and to the hospital where she worked. Ada was born in South London in early 1878 into a respectable middle-class family, and she joined the Hospital for Sick Children in December 1899, aged 21, as a paying probationer. She completed her 3-year training in December 1902 with a certificate in nursing. Ada could have gone on to become a staff nurse at the hospital. She got good reports in her final exams. But at the end of the 3 years, instead, she decided, according to the hospital records, she left to get married. I say according to the hospital records because other records, notably from the registry offices, reveal she had actually got married in August 1901, so a year and a half earlier, at Holborn Registry Office, which was just around the corner from the hospital. Why did she do this? If her marriage had been revealed, she would certainly have been forced to abandon her training halfway through, but it seems she was determined to both get married and also to continue her course. And as she was able to continue her course, she was obviously successful in keeping her marriage a secret, from the hospital authorities at least. Surprisingly, in 1904, I found out she and her husband got married again. And I think this is a flavour of the woman we're talking about. They got married at a church in Kensington, and I think this second marriage was what I would call diplomatic. Her husband, William Kirby Green, had been a junior diplomat in Africa before enrolling to fight in the Boer War, and had returned to that role on his discharge from the army. A certificate confirming her marriage to Ada in an established church probably eased her way to accompany him back to Africa. This is my theory, I can't prove it. Anyway, I have become a little fascinated by this woman, and we'll talk a bit more about at the end. But what I first want to do is give you a flavour of the hospital. What was the Hospital for Sick Children like when Ada joined as a trainee nurse? This slide shows one of the main buildings, which was opened in the early 1870s as the hospital began its massive expansion. By 1899, it had been treating child inpatients for nearly 50 years. It had a nursing staff of at least 60, of which 2/3 were probationers. With 200 plus beds and a large outpatients department, it was a busy place and at the leading edge of the newly emerging discipline of paediatric medicine. As I've already said, Ada joined as a paying probationer. In other words, she and her fellow paying probationers paid the hospital 52 guineas for their first year's training. At the end of this year, they could opt to leave with a note saying they'd done a very good job for a year, but they weren't continuing. Or they could continue for 2 more years, joining the main body of probationers who were paid a small wage. And if they completed the 3-year course and passed their exams, they received a certificate as a qualified nurse. And this is exactly what Ada did. Life as a probationer nurse was far from easy. They worked hard, they had long hours, infrequent short breaks, and in addition to the hands-on training on the wards, they also attended theory classes, including medical sciences, surgical nursing, and invalid cookery. Turnover was high, with over 1/3 leaving before the end of the 3-year course. while many pain probationers did not even manage to complete the 1 year. So Ada was among a select few who actually stuck it out. So now you've got a very, very brief idea of what the hospital is like and who Ada was. Let's go on to these notebooks. And this is the front cover of the first of her notebooks. It's covered in germs, these little creatures. You'll find out later are all germs. And we meet them later on. Each notebook, as I said, contains around 50 to 60 sketches accompanied by verse, which provide insight into Ada's somewhat cynical view of the hospital and its staff. If you look closely at the germs, you can see them. I hope you can see it. They're holding up, actually, the hospital's initials, HSC. So you've got the H on the left, the S in the middle, and the C in black on the right. So it's mixing this association between germs and hospitals immediately. However, let's open up the books and discover some more. This is probably one of my favourites of her cartoons. It's typical of Ada's cartoon. It shows, it's sketched, it's quite plain, there's not a lot of detail, but you can see exactly what's going on. And it illustrates what she thought, what Ada thought, of some of her fellow pain probationers, who were also referred to as lady probationers, especially the ones who didn't complete their first year. And she labelled it, "This is the nurse who wishes the matron to allow her to go back to being a lady again." The matron is interviewing a pain probationer who wants to leave, and her response, according to Ada anyway, is, "Well, if you must, but staying might be easier," implying it's going to be very hard work for her to get back home. And if you can see just in the background, the door, there's the little face of a nurse peering round, and I just wonder if that's Ada overhearing this conversation. Anyway, as Ada suggests in the accompanying verse, some lady pros found the work much too hard to bear. And as she says, "This new pro or rough work declined, for to rub and scrub she'd no mind. She said, I'm not slack, but I think I'll go back and once more be a lady refined." And this is just so typical of the verse that Ada uses to accompany her cartoons. The notebooks are filled with these verse and cartoons, similar in design and structure to what you see here. The notebooks are not dated, so it's impossible to say if they follow a chronological order, or if she produced them all at once, or over the 3 years at her hospital, or even after she left the hospital. It's just impossible to say. They are signed by her at the back, just with her initials, AG or AAB, or sometimes AGB. But so it's impossible to say exactly when they were produced. And one of the things I'm interested in pursuing is how useful are they from a historical point of view? Are they figments of Ada's imagination, or do they actually reflect her experiences as a probationer? There is one set of cartoons in her notebooks which can be verified and dated, recorded not just by Ada, but by national newspapers as well. And that's that in 1902, the hospital celebrated its Golden Jubilee. A bazaar was organised in the Royal Botanical Gardens in Regent's Park to celebrate the Golden Jubilee and the coronation of Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, who was a very big supporter of the hospital. It was a spectacular 3-day event which took place in July, and Ada dedicated several cartoons to the great fair. This first cartoon shows a car filled with men in suits and black top hats, and a woman dressed in black at the far right. I assume the suits are senior doctors and hospital managers, while the woman is probably the matron. It's all very sedate, smartly dressed driver, totally in control of the car. It couldn't be more in contrast to the next cartoon that Ada drew, in which a second car is shown, crammed with probationers. We know they're probationers because of their pink uniforms, and they're packed in cheek by jowl. Several have fallen off or are in the process of falling off, and the driver himself looks rather dazed. The driver, unlike the first car, doesn't seem to be quite in control. His hair is being blown about all over the place. There's a great feeling of speed, which are accentuated perhaps by very red wheels. And this is one of the first indications we have of how Ada feels about hospital bosses and their relationship with their nurses. That is, she feels undervalued. The trainees took the bulk of nursing on the wards. There were 42 probationers, only 14 staff nurses, and I think Ada felt that their efforts went unrecognised. This is the next cartoon where Ada shows the bazaar itself. She shows a typical summer's day in London. According to the Evening Standard, who did an article on the event, it poured with rain, was cold, and the gale was blowing. And in Ada's cartoons, you can see hats, umbrellas, and even children are being carried away on the wind. And the nurses, who are of course serving the tea, are trying gamely to hold everything together. As Ada said, tea was not at all a tame affair. To provide one's friends with refreshment, one laid oneself open to serious bodily injury. I think she has a great knack for adding a sense of movement to her drawings, as you can see in this one. The theme of being undervalued occurs all the time through the notebooks. The calmness of the first car scene and the chaos of the second reflect this, and this is reinforced in this third sketch, where nurses might be going to the party, but they're going to work for it. They're serving teas to the more distinguished guests. And these are some of more distinguished guests. These are a set of cartoons reflecting on the countless number of visitors who pass through the hospital. In these two images, nurses are again showing waiting on people. The higher social standing of these visitors indicated on the left-hand side by the woman with the showy dress who is walking on the arm of Adrian Hope, the guy with a very impressive moustache and beard, who is the hospital secretary. We greatly enjoyed waiting on the distinguished visitors and Adrian Hope, says Ada, suspected with her tongue firmly in her cheek, and found the novelty of meeting them delightful, she adds in the second. The hospital was always awash with visitors, not patients' families, oh no, but members of high society for whom visiting was part of the social round, where they could overtly demonstrate their philanthropic urges. Ada appears to have very little respect for them. In another major theme running through the two books, Ada returns to the less glamorous side of her job. The other visitors, the fear of infection, which increases as winter approaches. She represents the arrival of winter in a long series of cartoons in which she talks of times of storm and trouble, when everyone is upside down twixt work and worry-tossed. The isolation ward is being reopened, the dreaded winter fevers are making an appearance, and in the next cartoon, Ada makes light of what must actually have been a very stressful time. This slide shows a double cartoon, and it's rather odd. It's bizarrely, we see nurses on the left-hand side entering a lottery to decide which fever they will win. The first cartoon shows them drawing lots, so the trough on the left-hand side is full of slips of paper and they're pulling them out. And Ada writes, the nurses are all choosing things and having them in turn, and she who draws the largest prize with pride and glory burns. And then if we move on to the second cartoon, the happy nurse on the left has drawn the diphtheria ticket, the best prize in the draw. And this black humour about a real danger all the nurses faced every day is perhaps a coping mechanism. It certainly suggests a rising fear of what winter will bring. And then this is the first time we actually meet the germs. They appear throughout the notebooks, crawling up walls, chasing nurses and clinging to their skirts. The nurses are doing everything they can to avoid catching something. As Ada says, I've just knocked into scarlet and just avoided dipth. It's not an easy matter, though, to give the germs the slip. The germs are evil but playful little creatures, sometimes red, sometimes black, always chasing nurses and hanging around the wards. And in the second cartoon, you can see more about these more about the germs. She develops the theme further. There's a general suspicion of everyone. Everyone suspects that everyone else is carrying some infection or other. Here you can see two germs shaking hands on the left-hand side, sitting on the shoulders of two nurses, and as the carriers walk past each other, the germs are shaking hands. While above, and I don't quite understand this metaphor, the black germ appears to be shooting the red one. I have no idea what that's about. There's a full series of images on this theme, and I'd really love to have shown them all to you, but we haven't got time. Another of her pet subjects is the accommodation that the nurses are asked to live in. Ada's completely unimpressed by it. It's cramped, it's unkempt and ridden with infestation. So you see the verse she writes is on the left-hand side, and then you've got a small drawing of a nurse's bedroom. And she writes, "You are sure to delight in a room that has never known duster or broom. A bed you'll find there, and perhaps half a chair. So you'll see there's no reason for gloom." And as before, Ada's commentary is riddled with this sarcasm. There's no reason for gloom, but the poor new probationer is sitting on her bed in the room she's been allocated, crying her eyes out. It's not surprising. By this time, by the turn of the century, certainly at Great Ormond Street, most of the probationers, whether paying or not, come from solid middle-class backgrounds with comfortable homes. And the hospital accommodation must have been a great shock. And there's evidence to support this supposition from Ada's drawing in the archive, a number of letters from parents expressing their horror at the conditions in which their daughters have to live. So it's not something that Ada has made up. As we've seen, some of the events which Ada recorded can be verified through other sources, but others are more difficult. There's a short sequence of cartoons and verse which relate to a fire at the convent. This probably refers to new accommodation for nurses, which opened around 1900 in the recently acquired Old Catholic Hospital next door. I haven't been able to confirm that a fire took place there. And there's no mention in the newspapers at the time, and Nick Baldwin, the archivist, who's in the audience with us today, and I haven't been able to confirm this happened. There's no mention in the records. So did it really happen? What I have found is in July 1901, there's a note that a fire escape was erected for the nurse's house, and I wonder if this was in reaction to the fire that they didn't actually talk about, because it doesn't matter. I find it hard that Ada would make this up, and I think these two cartoons are brilliant. The action in them is really good. They show flames and smoke emerging through a door. Matron raises the alarm. One nurse in her night attire in the left-hand cartoon, you can see her in the left-hand cartoon on the left, peers with a look of horror around her bedroom door. And the caption reads, "Awful discovery of a fire at the convent." In the second cartoon, more nurses appear with water buckets and hoses attacking the blaze. Even the matron is helping. And Ada can't resist a bit of humour, even in this dark time. So in the left-hand corner, you can see a nurse with a hose. It's gushing water, but she's been distracted by something and is looking away and accidentally drenches a fellow nurse who's standing in front of her hose. She just can't help adding a bit of humour into her work. Well, a lot of humour, actually. So what does she think about the doctors? Not a lot. She doesn't attempt to disguise her feelings. And here we've got two cartoons about doctors. The first shows a doctor at the back in the suit being dragged into the ward by chains or something. I think the guy doing the dragging is probably a porter. And while the nurse waits patiently for him to arrive for his ward rounds. And on the second cartoon, got a group of doctors, and they're dancing "Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush," which again, you really expect of doctors in a ward. And it suggests that Ada thinks they don't take the ward rounds particularly seriously. But notice, sitting on each of the screens, we've got a couple of germs admiring the view and laughing at the doctors and say, "Hey, we don't need to worry about anything here. We're fine." So this is the only cartoon in Ada's 2 books that actually refer to the patients in the hospital. It shows, and really it's not about the patients, it's about the nurses. And it shows a scene from the block, which is possibly the isolation ward. And it's in chaos because the maids have got their half day off, so the nurses are on their own. And so in the ward kitchen, they're preparing meals, and on the ward themselves, they're sweeping floors, they're stoking the fire, they're trying to look after everything. And in the background, the children are going mad, basically. They're shouting, they're falling out of bed, they're having a great time, some of them, I would say. In the cartoon, one nurse runs from the ward into the kitchen, says, "Oh, nurse, come quickly, Harry's going to have a fit." But the nurse in the kitchen says, "Well, he'll just have to wait till these sausages are cooked, because I haven't got time." I do wonder why Ada didn't draw more scenes of her little patients, of her work with her patients. And I've thought about this, and I think most of these 2 notebooks and her commentary is derisory, at least, and in an ironic tone. And I think it's possible she didn't feel like that about her patients. She actually quite liked them. So they had no place in her work, which for her was primarily a critique of the institution in which she worked. I think that's possible. There are so many stories in her notebook which I don't have time to share. Stories about, and they're very weird, some of them, stories about beetles, about goldfish, about servants, about cats, and about armed men. Very odd. But we haven't got time to look at them. And I'm just wondering what all this tells us about nursing in the children's hospital at the turn of the 20th century. Her depictions of tense relationships between nurses and senior staff, the constant fear of infection, must surely reflect her own experience. This is my view. And I think such material as this deserves a much closer inspection to reveal more about the lived experience of being a trainee nurse in the era. Just one more slide. So I said earlier that I'd become a bit obsessed by Ada. So I wanted to know more about the woman who has created this little archive of her own. And here she is. I found nothing when she married her husband in 1904. They then went off to Nyasaland, where he became a diplomat in the British service. And I have found nothing yet about her time in Nyasaland. I'm going to try and attack the National Archives and see if there's anything, but anybody's got any other ideas about where to look for stuff about the British community in Nyasaland, it would be great. However, by accident, I stumbled across a fantastic resource. Some American universities digitized a whole load of newspapers from across the world, and within that was 3 newspapers from Tangier, which mentioned her, and I knew she had gone to Tangier because of something else I'd seen before. Anyway, she and her husband pop up in late 1920s after William has retired the diplomatic service, and they've moved from Nyasaland to Tangier, and they immediately become active members of Tangier's thriving British community. I don't know how much you know about Tangier in the mid-20th century, but apparently it's a hive of art and crafts and just general good fun, it seems to me. After William died, William died in 1945, and Ada remained there for at least another 3 years, continuing to play a key role in this thriving expat community, which attracted artists, writers, and high-class socialites. And she's described by, of all people, Truman Capote in an article in Vogue. And I have to say, I gave a version of this paper last year at Kiel at the Yukon conference, and somebody got back to me afterwards, fascinated, did a bit of research and sent me the link to this Vogue article, which I thank him for immensely. And in the Vogue article, Truman Capote refers to her as being one of the 3 great green ladies. They're green because their surname is Green. It's Ada her sister-in-law Ferida, and her husband's cousin Jessie. And by all accounts, these three formidable women were the rulers of Tangier's social scene. So this is where Ada ends up. And this photograph, taken by Cecil Beaton, which accompanies Capote's article, shows her posing with her pet parrot, from whom she's never separated, and smoking a Russian cigarette for which she is infamous. She would have been in her early 70s by this time. I haven't been able to find a record of her death or any further evidence of her continuing her artistic talents, but I'm still looking for that. So, in conclusion, I just want to say I hope you enjoyed this. It's such a brief glimpse that it was really hard to narrow it down to which of her cartoons to use. If you want to see a few more of her cartoons, you can find them in an extended version of this talk, which was published as an article in the 2025 UConn Bulletin. And you can get it by going to this address, https:/bulletin.uconn.org, and go to the 2025 issue, and my article there has more cartoons in it, so you can get an even bigger flavour. So that's really it. I hope I haven't run over too much. I'm happy to take any questions, but before that, I just want to thank Nick Baldwin, the archivist at Great Ormond Street, for allowing me to image the notebooks and in helping me to interpret and verify some of the events that Ada recorded. Thank you very much.
I'm doing questions. We'll do questions at the end, yeah. Thank you so much for that, Sue. That was just fascinating. Yeah, hope that we can learn more about Ada as more is uncovered. Okay, we'll move on. So I would like to introduce Holly Burrows. So Holly works at the Cartoon Museum, which I'm told is just 10 minutes in some direction, not far. So this is the UK's only museum dedicated to the art of comics, cartoons, and the people who make them. So Holly, if you would like to come up, please.
So yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for coming. And yeah, we are, according to Google Maps, 9 minutes away in that direction. So do come and visit. So I'll do a brief introduction into the museum in case there's any of you who don't know about us. Oh, it's missing a slide. I'll have to try and remember it. So we set up 20 years ago. It's our 20th birthday this year. And we have a collection of thousands of articles of comics, cartoons from newspapers, books, magazines, much of which is in storage, but a lot of it is on display. We've got hundreds of cartoons on display. We have a larger gallery, which is our permanent collection, and it's dates way back to Gilray, Hogarth, to the present day. And then we have temporary exhibition space, which changes roughly every 4 to 6 months, and that shows a whole wide-ranging thing. Like we've had Wallace and Gromit, we had cats in cartoons, and what I decided to do for the talk was I had a look to see if we had anything in our current exhibition on display which was relevant to here. So this was one of the first ones I saw, which is in our collection, saying, "How was your first day back?" It's by a cartoonist, Ed Naylor, and this is the COVID virus. And this was submitted to us. So a few years back, we did an exhibition on Boris Johnson, and he was apparently the most cartooned Prime Minister ever. And it was really interesting because we did an open call and just kind of said to anyone, whether they're a professional cartoonist or not, if you'd done a cartoon about Boris Johnson's kind of era as Prime Minister, so it's Brexit, Ukraine, obviously COVID, they could submit it for the exhibition. And it was really interesting. We had quite a bit of discussion about how we should be balanced in our opinions of Boris Johnson, but no one submitted anything in support of him. So this is obviously a comment on when the schools were reopened, and obviously teachers were having to work pretty much all the way through it, and COVID was pretty endemic within the school community. This one is Martin Honeysett. So you can see there's a presumably elderly lady in bed. I guess that's a relative. It must be her birthday. And they all say happy birthday. And then one of the cards says, "Do not resuscitate." And at the bottom it says, "And a card from the nurses." So a particularly difficult patient, I'm guessing. This one, so you may have heard of Heath Robinson. This is from our archive, actually, it's not on display. And it's called Manipulation Deluxe. And there's a guy in bed, which is kind of being pulled up by, I don't know, this man pulling a lever. I think he's being massaged on the head by a nurse. I'm not entirely sure. He's also been shown something on a chart. And he's also smoking, and he's got some tea next to him. Guessing it's a private hospital. And then this was a bit of a blurry image, but I just like it. This is by Michael Heath. And they say, "You're looking a bit peaky, dear." And the man in the bed in the background is holding a newspaper which says "Hospital Superbug Shock." And it's Kafka is on the name of the bed where the bug is. Because it's a play on the story by him where someone wakes up turned into an insect, and obviously hospital superbugs as well. But I just really like the depiction of that bug. Huge. So around the same time as when we were talking about coming and doing this talk, and we ran some workshops today as well with families and children drawing activities, someone got in touch with us who's a nurse currently, and her mum, Leah, was a nurse on the rheumatology wards at Battle Hospital Reading between 1969 and 1991. So this is her. The picture on the left, I think, is 1986, and the one on the right was 2019. And when Leah here was working as a nurse, she drew cartoons between 1984 and 1992 before retiring. And she published them in a book in 2013. And her daughter has approached us to see if we were interested in collecting the book for our collection. And I thought, well, this is perfect for all of what we're doing with the Royal College of Nursing. And this is kind of Leah's description of why she was doing it. So the book ended up being called Battle Lines. Initially it was called The Nursing Progress. And she wrote, "The cartoons were drawn out of frustration during my 21 years of working in the local hospital as a staff nurse in the rheumatology unit. I learnt such a lot during that time, got to know some wonderful people, worked with fantastic colleagues and patients who are still my friends to this day. When I started drawing the cartoons, staff would come and tell me about incidents which had taken place in the hospital, and from those, miraculously, came the drawings. They appeared complete in my head, and all I had to do was go home, sit down, and draw them with the captions. I am not an artist, only drawing as a child, but it was never developed in any way, so my nurses appeared from somewhere else, I feel. I also did other drawings, mainly for patients who had a birthday coming up. They were presented with a wall hanging with a personalised design on an Inco pad, which I had to look up what that was. Incontinence pad, if there's anyone doesn't know, which could be proudly shown off to visitors and hung on the wall above one's bed. But I loved my little nurses best. I almost felt I could pick them up and set them down. I hope you enjoy seeing them and smiling, maybe nostalgically. Nursing is not like that anymore." So I'll show you a selection of some of the cartoons. And I think it's really interesting, this following the previous talk, because it kind of shows how little has changed. So this one is the two nurses saying, "I don't really think that everything that comes from America is marvellous, except maybe peanut butter, and even that is overrated." And I picked this one out from the book because I thought, well, this is just a continuing story of kind of the American healthcare system kind of coming into our system. And that was all that time ago. I think the other thing actually that I just wanted to comment on following the previous talk was how she's drawn her nurses really simply. Like those are beautifully seen and illustrated, but it shows how you don't necessarily have to be able to draw in that way to be able to make a point or a comment or a joke. There is nothing on her care plan about her turning green. So don't worry, Mrs. Jones. According to the computer, there is nothing wrong with you. And I like this one because I kind of was thinking sort of almost the opposite thing. Like now everyone Googles all their health symptoms and they will definitely find something wrong with you. Yeah. That tap has been dripping since 1983. We have sent 149 requisitions in to have it mended. And I kind of think that's something that maybe most people everywhere who work somewhere can identify with. Cuts, I'm afraid, Mrs. Unger. You've been allocated half a nurse for your bath. So I really, because the first time I saw that, I didn't quite notice that that nurse was actually cut in half. Just a small injection, Mr. Gubbin. And actually, this is one of the images when we our drawing activity today. We did a kind of a caption competition, and then one which was just the caption, and people could draw the images. And so we got some really interesting drawings for the just a small injection one. Only 2 visitors to each bed, not in each bed. Not sure if that really happens. Maybe it does. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is your pain like? So yeah, and so that's in a section called care plans and jargon. And certainly I think most people can understand the idea, even if you're not in nursing, of having to kind of tick boxes and make things fit certain kind of things. That's the manager. I understand he came from a pest control firm. And that's funny because I recently spoke to someone who is a doctor, and they were talking to me about how they thought not necessarily the right people became managers. So there you go. Nobody to hear you, love. They're all at a meeting. This is Roberta. She will give you your pressure area care in 3 minutes, 30 seconds time. And I thought that one was interesting because she's called it Brave New World. And obviously it was showing the introduction of kind of technology. But we're now in this place where we've got AI. And definitely AI is being brought into healthcare situations as well. So yeah, that's quite interesting to see. And I quite like the depiction of the robot as well. Thank you very much. So yeah, please come and visit.
Thank you so much for those, Holly. They were great. I think perhaps worryingly very true. Even now, absolutely. But yeah, great to see those. Okay, we will move on now to our last speaker of the evening. So I will introduce Corinne Pearlman, who's director of the First Graphic Novel Award, a literary agent with Pearlman and Lacey, and she was commissioning editor at Myriad, publishing several graphic novels that have become pillars of graphic medicine. These include Ian Williams' The Bad Doctor and Zara Slattery's Coma. Okay, so if you'd like to come up, Corinne.
Thanks very much, Victoria, for the intro, and thanks to Sarah Cheney for inviting me here. I've now been introduced to kind of 2 new women cartoonists who I didn't know anything about, so that's very exciting. But first of all, I think I need to do a bit of sort of literary housekeeping, as it were, because I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the term graphic medicine. And could I have a show of hands? Anyone who's heard that term before? It's a very right. Okay. Graphic medicine is used. Of course, I think everybody knows this, and I'm glad I asked. It's used as it describes long form narratives using words and pictures, otherwise known as comics, but they're long form, usually as a book. And that relate to all aspects of kind of health, care, medicine, and so on. In other words, they're comics about care, they're comics about health, and most of them are actually in book form. And you can usually find them, by the lavatory in Waterstones, kind of at the back near the door. So I don't know how many of you are kind of nursing professionals here, and how many people are comic creators. But I'm personally not aware of any UK-based nurse creators within the field of graphic medicine. In other words, I don't know any nurses in the UK who are graphic novelists. The researchers, yes. Academics, yes. Comics educators, yes. Who may have done classes with nursing staff. Comic creators include many doctors, yes, and patients, of course. And nurse representation in comics, yes. But nurses themselves creating comics, I would love to know where they are. For me, in my experience as a patient and also as a carer, I'm always struck by the invisibility of the active voice of nurses in review meetings and elsewhere, and when they're so key to the process of health. And I have to say that in my own experience as an editor and publisher of graphic medicine titles, this is the first time that I have asked out loud that most simple question: where are the nurses? The only comics nurse I know personally whose own website is called that, Comics Nurse, is M.K. Serwick, who drew this cartoon. And it's a kind of script. Oh, no, it's Czerwiec, pronounced Serwick. She's based in Chicago. And she says there are a few of us nurse cartoonists, but not many, and even fewer published, she says. But she adds, this topic is timely, as a few nursing colleagues here in the States and I are organizing a graphic nursing think tank. Our goal is to think more deeply about how graphic medicine can be pivoted to graphic nursing. Specifically, how can comics be integrated into the nursing curriculum as deeply as medicine has done? I'll return to this later, but let me map out my own route into comics and healthcare as an editor of graphic novels and a sometime cartoonist. My first job was with age concern in the 1970s, where my concern for the elderly emerged in a rather dubiously humorous comic, Cold Oldies, about hypothermia. And Gertie, who is the heroine of this, says, "Shocking what you read about these old folk dying of cold, isn't it?" And then the television says 2 more old people died from hypothermia today, as welfare organizations estimated this winter's death toll could be as high as 45,000. You don't need to see any more of this, but that sort of states my early interest. That dates from about kind of 1973 or 4, I think. As a lifelong fan of comics, and I'm primarily a reader, I would say, my first encounter with representation of nurses in comics was Susan of St. Bride's, who appeared in the weekly comic Girl. This story from the early 60s is about an elderly patient who doesn't want to see the foreign doctor, reflected in contemporary scripts like Call the Midwife, of course. And here she is, you see, the matron saying, the nurse saying, "Dr. White is ill and we have a foreign doctor in his place, Dr. Mario. Now, Mrs. Harris, your turn to see the new doctor." And she said, "I liked old I liked old Dr. White. I don't like foreigners. As a freelance cartoonist, I worked for a variety of pressure groups and NGOs, including the Politics of Health Food Group, which focused on the detrimental effect that the processes of the food industry was having on people's health. My cartoons typically focused on pesticides, low wages, non-unionized workers, and on fat cat money bags exploiting the working class, but not on the nurses who were actually caring for the victims of these, awful practices. In 1986, I co-founded Comic Company, using comics to educate about the way in which the tobacco industry and food industry were impacting on our health and welfare. Comics in health education with young people led to a series of sexual health leaflets for FPA, the Family Planning Association. And the nearest we got to representing nurses was the mantra, for more help, see a doctor or nurse at your GP surgery. My career in publishing graphic medicine began in 2008 with Myriad, where I combined my interests in comics and healthcare by commissioning a list of fiction and non-fiction full-length graphic novels. And you can see some of those here. Mostly memoir, but some fictional, and although often autobiographically based. Ian Williams, who you can see top left corner, he is actually kind of, along with M.K. Selwick, sort of talked of as the co-founder of the graphic medicine movement. And he writes fiction from his experience as a GP. And it's sort of comic, but they are about kind of real life. And other books here mostly spoke from the patient's experience, such as Zara Slattery's Coma, or from the carer's perspective, so the things to do in a retirement home trailer park when you're 29 and unemployed. This is by the son looking after his father who has emphysema, and because Nye was an unemployed graphic artist, he was the one who looked after his father and created this very moving book. I'll go on. The Facts of Life by Paula Knight. That's about infertility treatment, and also about her own experience of living with ME. Right, the other, so these are, as you can see, they don't think it's like doctor, the author's a doctor, patient, patient, biographer, and then the Hannah Eaton, yes, this is more, the Naming Monsters is about mental health, and she lost her mother aged about 15, and it's the experience of how she kind of dealt with that. Right, and then we also published these two manuals. So these Kate Evans, her best-selling non-fiction manuals on breastfeeding and childbirth. And although the visual focus is very much on the birth givers, but supportive midwives do make positive appearances, as here. And needless to say, the doctors often do less well. I think you can read that. Other meaningful, if infrequent, appearances by nurses in these novels are, in fact, typically positive, supportive, and perceptive, but in support of the patient experience. And to look at kind of a couple of books specifically, in Hole in the Heart, a graphic memoir by Henny Beaumont about bringing up her daughter with Down syndrome, she pictures the frustrations and concern of the nursing staff, as well as that of the parents in grappling with an unwanted diagnosis. So here you can see the nurse saying, nurse thinking, saying, can't let these people go. I have to find someone who can tell them. Perhaps I can get them to work it out for themselves. And then she says, who does baby look like? Does she look like your other children? Is there anyone in the family she resembles? And then a doctor comes in and says, congratulations, you have a beautiful baby. And the nurse is thinking, Jesus, the doctor is completely hopeless. Why can't she see it? And she goes into the corridor and finds another doctor. Please, can you just come and have a quick look? I'd really value your opinion. And he says, you've no idea how busy I am. And she thinks, twat. And then next page, the parents are thinking, who does she look like? She looks like me. The back of my head is flat. And then they turn round to the staff and say, can anyone tell us if she has Down syndrome? And then the answers, I can't tell, I don't know, I'm not sure, best not to worry. And of course, as the nurses, it's not necessarily their responsibility to take that any further. That was birth, and this is more about the older people in Special Exits by Joyce Farmer, an American cartoonist. This is a graphic memoir based on the care she gave to her father and his wife as they struggled with increasing infirmity and dementia. As with Tangles by Sarah Levitt, another book about dementia, and also about a daughter looking after her mother, it's a moving and loving portrait of caring for someone with dementia and illustrates the value of care work itself. And you can see here it's Thanksgiving week, and Laura is coming to give her father's wife a bath. Okay, stay there, please. Now to your left. No, the other way, to your left. Are you crying, Rachel? No, I don't think so. Here, I'll move you. Ready? Okay. And the husband is taking up the soiled clothes. Ow, that hurt. Where does it hurt? I don't know. Are you ready for your bath? Oh, yes, I'm ready. And what are we going to do now? I'm going to give you your bath now. Okay. And the book is full of a lot of episodes like that, which are just very beautifully, that's life. And the exchange in those last two panels is really beautifully done. An important addition to caring stories is a comics anthology about care, which came out last year. And this is from the perspective of caregivers and receivers, some of whom are, I don't know if anyone was a nurse involved in this, but they were certainly some of them were professional carers. But this particular story is called The Kindness of Strangers by Ryan Prout and Ilya. And it's a wordless story as if told from the impersonal perspective of a hospice room. And yet there is a main character, not the patient or the family, but the figure in the background, the nurse who prepares the room for the patient. And so we see her, and we can see her on the top left in the background with the patient, and the son and his wife or whoever they're coming to visit. We see them with the patient. They leave. She said there are a few more panels in between here. And night happens, and the next day the nurse comes in and sees that the patient has died, and then receives the family, and gives them some time to themselves, and sees them off, and then is faced with the empty room and prepares it again for the next patient. And you see the other nurse comforting her as she's gone through this experience. And this is this same thing has obviously affected. I'll show another image of that, what M.K. Selwick calls taking turns. In fact, where are we? Sorry. got a bit muddled up there. Yeah, okay. So as for comics creators who are also nurses, that rare breed, we do have a powerful exception with the Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist. Ernesto Barbieri is a nurse in the intensive care unit and he gets published in the Boston Globe. He writes the story and works with his wife, Jeff Rulifson, who draws. And it's a collaboration showing the tenderness and brutality of the intensive care unit, and it covers topics such as end-of-life care, violence against nurses, and medical error. And these are all online. They're not published, but they do appear in the Boston Globe. For instance, The Sisters tells the story of 3 sisters, one of whom is kept alive because her 2 siblings insist that she would have wanted everything done to keep her so. And we see here, in all our time caring for Helen, bathing her, clipping her fingernails with that grip, she could hurt you, suctioning mucus from her airway and irrigating her fecal tube. In all that time, she spoke just one word: no. So we come back here to M.K. Serwick, the only graphic novelist I know about who is herself a trained nurse. She describes herself as a nurse who uses comics to contemplate the complexities of illness and caregiving. Taking Turns chronicles her years nursing on an HIV/AIDS unit in Chicago in the 1990s, and it remains a core title in the graphic medicine movement, sharing lived experience, exploring the boundaries between patient and carer, colleague and friend. And here is where The Empty Room appears again. We see her here. She's taken one of her patients out and having coffee. And he says to her, "Oh, so I've been meaning to ask you something. What's it like when we die? I mean, you've been there, you've watched it, right? Yeah. Well, what can I expect? Am I making you feel uncomfortable?" No, it's a very good question. I'd ask me too. And then they have a conversation about it, and it becomes clear that he wants her to be there when he's dying, and he wants to be reassured. And it's after that conversation she goes back to the doctors and said, "Look, I'm too much of a friend. Can you give someone else the primary nursing care, and I'll just go on and see him as a friend?" And she does that, and he eventually does die. And the next day, every trace of evidence that Tim had lived and died in that room was gone. "MK, Dr. Blatt is on the phone for you. You were a good friend to Tim. Thanks. Are you okay?" "I'm here and I'm remembering what Rosa told me, that when we lose someone, we turn around and there's somebody else who needs us." "That's true. His name is Andy. He's a good friend. He's here in my office and he needs a bed." "Okay, we've got it." MK is a renowned comics educator and activist herself, not only wanting to bring the discourse of comics to nursing education, but also to use comics to represent nurses' valuable voices in the wider world. In 2019, she contributed a comic called Ask a Nurse to the Shameless Feminists anthology, looking at the disregard for the expertise of nurses in health-related stories in print media. A US study of 1997 found that only 4% of stories consulted nurses, and another study in 2017 found only 2% did so. 10 years later, has this percentage changed? And here we go. It's sort of, she's saying, she's quoting us, "What does it mean? What does it mean to make your expertise known? Well, toot your own horn." And then talking about a comic chat, "Where are the women?" And then relating it to health. If you do it in the right venue and bring others along with you, it's never bragging. It's how we get our voices heard. And then that's where they say, "Where are the nurses?" Okay, back again. yeah, social media makes it easier than ever to toot your own horn, but it's not just low pay and long hours that hold people back. As Una, another graphic novelist, illustrates in her comic On Sanity about her mother's psychosis, there's the hierarchy to consider. And I think this is all creators have a hierarchy, and all creators have people or family who they're worried about, especially if about offending, especially if they're writing something autobiographical. And obviously, a lot of these stories are personal stories, and people do have to get over that bump. And here, obviously, professionally, it's not, how much is it a done thing to talk about these very personal experiences? And, with whistleblowers and so on, I mean, does it affect jobs too? So going back to MK also kind of deals with this problem, and she says, wow, this is really putting myself out there. It's scary, No more scary than anything else you did for the first time, especially as a nurse. How did you face that? Well, as one of my favorite nursing school professors would say, you're scared, that's okay, but you do it anyway. Well, precisely. That applies to all of the work we do as women, don't you think? So anyway, I think also kind of why there are so few comic creators in nursing. I mean, I can't draw is really not an option. You can see here that MK is quite a crude style, but it's effective and it gets the message across. Drawing is a tool like writing, and any combination of people can help make it happen. I think there's a whole world out there to discover. I've only kind of tapped to half of the books that I love and have influenced me in this field. The only good thing is comics is still obviously largely an invisible medium to many people. Enjoy the relative anonymity and get cracking from wherever you are in your own history. If you weren't in today's workshop with Holly, do consider the next or any opportunity you get to actually kind of do comics. And if you are nurses, maybe consider joining the graphic nursing think tank. Anyway, thank you very much.